Celebrating Diversity, Oh Yeah, by Humphrey, Jansz, of Claremont Meadows 2747. Narrated by Lex Marinos. It was an early morning arrival into Sydney. I felt weak, but eagerly joined the throng heading past duty-free shops to the waiting immigration officials. I'd been overseas for a short trip and had taken ill. Downplaying my symptoms, I'd taken an earlier return Qantas flight and was back on Australian soil. I looked up to the Australian passport holders sign and breathed a sigh of relief. Home. 4 years earlier, I'd arrived as an eager immigrant from Sri Lanka by way of a work stint in the Middle East. Working in the airline industry, I'd had the opportunity to visit Australia a couple of times before. But this time, it was for a permanent stay, the real deal. I'd been picked up at the airport where I'd stayed on previous visits by my uncle. I'd been mildly apprehensive, but mainly eager and excited. The dream had come true, and I was now a bona fide, soon-to-be Australian citizen. Immigration to a Western country had always been a Sri Lankan dream. Growing up, through schools and later, we looked with envy at Sri Lankans who'd been abroad, to use the old British term for travelling overseas. A bookworm, I'd grown up immersed in the adventures of characters from the pages of Enid Blyton, G.A. Henty, Henry Rider Haggard, Stevenson, and later Conan Doyle's inimitable Sherlock Holmes. To my juvenile mind, these writers symbolised a marvellous, foreign place from whence these stories sprang. There were others who also saw England and later Australia as places of opportunity where dreams could come true. And so, from the 1960s and on to the 1970s, the departures gathered momentum. I vividly recall my mother opening an aerogram, that splendid thin sheet of blue paper which enabled cheap overseas letter writing. It was from her old school friend and former neighbour. The words my mother read still resonate. Dearest Eileen, Australia is such a marvellous place. In Sri Lanka, I often struggled to find breakfast for my children. Now I ask my children what they'd like to eat. 1 year after arriving, my Kenyan fiancée joined me on a 3-month marriage visa, and the wedding day was set. Prior to her arrival, Jansz had taken me to visit a friend in Sydney who offered me a job at his workplace. We'd made plans to travel by coach to Melbourne. A week before the wedding, sharp chest pains were diagnosed as a heart attack. It was a body blow. I was 34, fit and strong, but tests showed that my cholesterol level was sky high. The wedding was postponed, but time was limited. My fiancée's visa was running out. So after a short stay in hospital and the cardiologist's instruction, no exertion, we travelled by train to the city and then coach to Melbourne. Imagine the thoughts of commuters who saw my fiancée struggling with our suitcase while I walked beside her. Typical bloody Asian couple. The wife does all the work. We returned to Sydney, but still had hopes of going back to Melbourne. My cousin took delight in saying, "Remember, the best road in Sydney is the Hume Highway to Melbourne." But hopes began to grow dim as the 1990 recession bit deep, and eventually the down payment on a house confirmed us as Sydney-siders. I've never regretted the decision. My Melbourneian uncle visited once in winter. On a crisp, clear, blue-skied winter morning, he looked up, savouring the bright sunshine, and said, "My gosh, we don't have winters like this in Melbourne." Ha! In the first year of our marriage, I was treated to several Kenyan specialty dishes of varied taste. I later found out that my wife would try a dish, and if it didn't turn out as expected or was slightly burned, it was offered to me as a Kenyan special dish. 2 years after my heart attack, a bypass operation became a necessity. and there are a few mishaps, but I came through, much leaner, somewhat depressed, but alive. I have unstinting praise and gratitude for my nurses and doctors, the hospitals I had to stay in, and the general medical system in Australia. I very likely would not have survived if still living in Sri Lanka. The year after, we were blessed with the arrival of a daughter. I had never been comfortable around children, but all that soon changed. My mother passed away the same year, and I cherished my daughter's arrival even more. Through her growing years, kindergarten, primary school, my wife taking her to little athletics and swimming, my appreciation and thanks for the opportunities and facilities in this country was a living substance in me. Here we were, from two different backgrounds, accepted and living the Australian dream. One year, the brilliant principals of my daughter's primary school decided to have a cultural day to celebrate the different ethnicities in his classrooms. The day was a resounding success, with food from several countries, colourful national dresses, and even a Kenyan chakacha, a hip-swaying Swahili dance in which the principal wrapped a lesso, sarong-type cloth, around his waist and joined the ladies. So here it is, a Sri Lankan of mixed English, Portuguese, Dutch, Sri Lankan lineage, marries a Kenyan of direct Yemeni, Indonesian and African descent in Melbourne. They moved to and set up home in Sydney. Their only child now works in the national capital, of which fact they are immensely proud. Their friends, including fair-skinned Anglo-Saxons, are scattered among the various ethnic communities that make up New South Wales. Living amidst the many peoples that make up Greater Sydney, they remember their backgrounds, think fondly of and regularly communicate with the families left behind, but they are Australian to the core. And that's fair dinkum Aussie cultural diversity, mate. The end.